Hello, this is David D. Hilster. I am a critical thinker, dissident science, and I'm here to tell you the truth about science, something your university professors won't tell you, the mass media won't tell you, of course those science evangelists won't tell you. I'm going to shorten that someday, but that's what I say. But anyways, I am here for a second time, and you don't know it because in another parallel universe we already did this because I got my OBS wrong. I got to be careful with that because that's OBS and BS means a whole bunch of things there. But I'm very
Yeah.
happy we've got those technical difficulties fixed, and I'm here with my good friend, dissident scientist, and what I think is probably the holder of one of the world's, if not the world's largest collection of dissident works, and that's Greg Volk. Greg, welcome.
Well, glad to be here, David.
So where are you? I'm here in Boca Raton, Florida. Where are you hailing
I'm
from?
in Eagan, Minnesota, just south of Minneapolis, St. Paul,
All right.
and there's a lot of dissidents out there. Not just we kind of specialize in the area of you know, uh, quantum physics, modern physics, things, I guess we might call hard physics, as opposed to biological and other things like that. And so I could not say that I have the world's largest collection in any of those other fields, but in our specific field having to do with atomic physics and particle physics and things like that, I don't know. I mean, I have some things that other people that nobody else has. That's that much.
Exactly, and that was one question I was going to have. What percentage of works that you have in your boxes and shelves and wherever you put them that you think that no one else on Earth has? What percentage?
Well, I don't know. Most of the stuff that I have that's of that type is the stuff I got from John Chappelle, which
Right, right.
that would take a minute to explain who he actually is. And you knew him better than I do, so I never met him myself. But
Hmm.
from being part of the Natural Philosophy Alliance, I ended up with all that stuff. So it's what it is really is a bunch of papers and a bunch of just things that he collected. He was a madman as far as typing things out back in the 80s and 90s. He would do that, and he would try to encourage people to come. So I have all the schedules of who the speakers were back in 1994 and stuff like that. So those kinds of things nobody else has, and maybe nobody else wants, but I have those. But also in there are people would write papers, before they spoke, and so some of those papers I just don't know who else has them. So those are the real gold as far as what I have. I also have some things like the Tothmation Review, which is from a guy named Harold Milnes, who died in Texas about 10 years ago, and he was putting this out 4 times a year, big thick, you know, periodical that he put out just himself, and he's just one of many that have done this kind of thing. And I have collected things like that because I don't think, if I don't, who's going to? So you'd be surprised at how much of that kind of stuff is out there and has been out there for decades.
So how do you get these? I mean, obviously I know with the MPA, which is really the organization we still have, we're the same people, but I mean, that I understand, John Chappelle. We can talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But how do you get these sort of oddball things? Do you just keep a lookout and just say, "Oh my gosh, if this
Yeah.
falls into nowhere, I'll feel guilty and I should just snatch it up"? How does that work?
Yeah, that's basically it. I try to be quite honest, David, and you know this very well, that a lot of the people that we've worked with over the years have, even since I got involved 10 years ago, many of them have passed on, and
Yeah.
many of them are elderly. And so I tried to, get the works of the stuff, don't let it get thrown out. If nothing else, I'll take it. That's kind of been the attitude I've had with a lot of this stuff. Some of these things, just some people had it for years and they said, "Oh, I don't really want it anymore." And so they gave it to me and I was glad to take it. So things like that, plus a lot of books. People, well, like your father, would retire, and then they would write a book or two or three, and they would maybe get 50 copies. I mean, it's not like they had a lot, and then they passed on, and their book is still around. You can get it at Amazon sometimes. You can get it at other places. So it's not, but there's not a lot of them, and also there's not a lot of people trying to get them. But so I've just made it kind of a hobby to collect things like that. So,
Yeah, I mean, it happens with me. In fact, I made a video which I haven't put out yet because I sometimes do a couple of them and put them out. But I got this book, which is pretty cool, which is Physics Without Photons by John Eric Pearson.
uh-huh.
So I got that, and I actually talk about it in a video, which you probably, if you're watching this, you probably haven't seen yet because it probably wasn't out if you watch this right away. But I talk about what it is. That's a whole different story. I don't want to get there. I want to talk about the history first. But I certainly want to drive across the idea, and that's what my video about this book was, not so much about what's in it, but how we approach it. When I get these books, I get really excited because
Yeah,
if it's really different from what I think, it's like, cool, this is so much better than reading another thing that we already have heard
sure.
7,000 times. You get
Exactly.
sometimes amazing stuff. But
Mhm.
one thing I do want to put some context on, I'll sort of speak a few minutes here, is John Chappell and
Sure.
NPA. And John Chappell pretty much was a critical thinker very early on, but he was really more in the school of special relativity,
Hmm.
uh, really mostly special, not even general,
Right.
and critiquing that because he was from that time. He was a doctor, and he got his degree from some small university, so it wasn't a big
Wait,
university.
yeah, Harvard, you mean?
Yeah, was it for Harvard? No.
Yeah, he was a Harvard grad. Are you
Oh
kidding?
my, no, wait a minute. Okay, then I have to go back and take a look at that. Maybe I was thinking about somebody else, but okay, well, gee whiz, there you
Yeah,
go.
just a little place. Yeah.
Just yeah, and I'm the one who knows all about him, but I did actually meet him, but
And by
he
the
was
way, just for what it's worth, a lot of people from the NPA and the NPA's roots were MIT people. So,
yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah.
not talking about stupid people.
No, we're not. In fact,
Just the way
when
it
we
is.
look at the database, one of the things people don't realize is I actually did a count on how many of the thousands of people, which we have, almost 3,000 people, have PhDs, and we came
A
up with
lot of them. Yeah.
18%. That's huge. That's
Yeah.
a huge
Yeah.
percentage. So yeah, these
There's
people are quite educated. But he
right.
basically was the one. He used old-fashioned telephones and snail mail and typewriters
Exactly,
and
because that was the
telephones.
technology of the 80s and 90s. That's what he did.
And you can take a look at him. I've got a video from him. In fact, somebody sent me videos, and I can't find them, or I sent them back because I wasn't being able to digitize them. You don't have any videos, do you? VHS?
I don't have much. Yeah, there's stuff on Domina from back in the early days, Domina Spencer,
Yeah.
but there's not anything that I can recall on John Chappelle himself. That's a good question. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I
I
haven't.
actually had some, and I don't know if I've misplaced because I just got shelves
You
and
roomed with
shelves
him,
of.
didn't you once?
Well, huh? Oh
Back in
yeah,
those.
yeah. I didn't tell you that story, but I mean, just to put it, he organized dissident people around the country, mostly people local to him, but he also contacted. They was as far as I think in Russia, and I think just with friends of friends who had other friends in universities, they got together and they would do conferences. And sometimes the one I would encourage everybody to go to the youtube.naturalphilosophy.org, and on there I have a 1992 video, I think, of John Chappelle in his
Hmm,
younger days, and
love to see that.
he set up. He was up there debating, and you would swear he had 100,000 people in front of him, but they had probably six people, five
Probably.
people,
Yeah,
and
that's
half
these
the
early
people.
conferences were not highly attended. I mean, there might have been 10, 15, 20, and then when, if they could get 30 or 40, they were thrilled, to get that many people. So it wasn't huge, these early conferences.
And he
But
never he never seemed to be bothered by that.
no,
And one of the things is that we have in our modern day, people say, well, there were only 13 people there, or there were only 20 there, because we had days where we had 120 people. Well, you
sure,
go through cycles, and I was even thinking that myself, because John Chappelle was of a generation that's really is passing on.
right?
And with that passing on, we have to pass the ball, and then you and I, who really like it, end up doing things. But John Chappelle, he kept going on and growing the. I met him in 1996. The MPA started with a number of people. I don't even know. Sometimes I forget who's involved. It was even Don Bradell was early on. There was somebody else I
Earlier.
met that I can't remember now that was really early on as well. and you had the Dominus Spencers, you had the
Mhm.
Francisco Mueller, you had
Jan Post is another one.
yep, and
John,
all the
John Post, who we awarded, and this is again a little more backstory, and that you probably need to tell, but we had an award called the Sagnac Award, and that there was a man who was a contemporary of Albert Einstein, Georges Sagnac, who discovered the effect, which is basically a rotating platform. You could have a beam of light follow the path of a rotating platform and another beam of light going the other direction, and there would be a fringe shift. There would be a differential between the two beams of the frequencies of the
right.
two beams of light. And I say that because a lot of people have never even heard of a Sagnac, and yet that's the basis for most of the most accurate the GPS systems and the most accurate things on ships that are used
Gyroscopes.
gyroscopes that are used to be able to navigate ships and be able to tell directions and so on. This is a technology that's used today in a lot of
Yeah.
things. But Jan Post was one of the people that we awarded. That was where I was going with that. And Jan Post was he wrote a paper in 1967. What that was the definitive. It was in the American Journal of Physics, the definitive paper to this day on the Sagnac effect.
Right.
In conventional physics. And many of our people, it's not as though there's a myth out there that anybody who is a dissident is off in one place and then all the normal people are in another place. That's just a myth. It's not true, because people like Jan Post and people like Tom Phipps and people, many dozens of other people, Andreas Cease, all have contributed to conventional journals like the American Journal of Physics or these others that are well known. And the same people will have other papers that are rejected by the same groups. So it's also there are many papers out there that for a time are accessible to what might be a little more, I don't want to say heretical points of view.
Mm-hmm.
And then a new editor comes into that same journal, and suddenly that journal becomes less accessible. And that's happened multiple times, and this is easy to show.
Yeah.
So there's my point is that the division between dissident, if you will, and conventional is much grayer than most people think.
I agree. One of the things with John Chappelle is that I actually got in touch for the first time. I've told this story before, but I don't think on my video, my YouTube channel. But I found out about the MP somewhere, and it was 1996. I was 36 years old, and I was trying to get Karazani's work out, which is really some really great work. And so I submitted a paper, and they accepted it, and I flew in there, and it was at the University of Arizona, and it was in Flagstaff, and I went into one of those lecture halls that are just real steep, those real steep ones, sort of older style. And
Yeah.
there was quite a few people there. I'd say 20, 30 people, and they were talking. And in front of the speaker, there was a speaker, a woman speaker, an elderly speaker, and she spoke like this.
I know who
And
that was.
I could not believe that you believe in ether. And she would speak like this. I found out later that I said, "Where are you from?" She goes, "Boston."
Yeah.
But
That's
anyways, the
common, huh?
story goes, I'm serious. I sat at the very top. I didn't even make a sound. I was worried that, okay, these were crazy people. I thought I had walked into the proverbial tinfoil hats, and this lady was talking in the most
Yeah.
weird way. And I'm a linguist, so I know all accents, and I'm not placing this one anywhere. And
Yeah,
she's going
she's
and
got a
talking in this
unique one.
way, and it was interesting after I started listening to her. But while she was talking, she would grab something on the desk, and she was so far down I couldn't see what really was going on. She was wrapped like a mummy. I thought she looked to be 107 years old, wrapped by this stuff, and that she like never took this off for 1,000 years, and she just keeps wrapping stuff. And so that's what I thought. And then I'm not kidding. She would pick up something from the table, and then she would stuff it in her coat. Now I thought maybe she had this problem of hoarding things.
Uh-huh.
But then one time when she did this, I heard it, And
I know what that is
I
too.
swear to gosh, I swear to the God Almighty, I swear, like, okay, she's got two heads. She's got one of those, like she was born with like a twin that never was separated or something, and she was feeding because I
Yeah.
couldn't until I found out that she was feeding a Chihuahua.
Yep.
And so here I was, I
She was
sat
never
there.
without.
And I guess it was sort of like I learned that and I used the same technique. I said to myself, I've come all this way. I actually got to, I said, okay, Dave, calm down. I'm not going to walk out. What am I going to walk out? I just got there. So I sat there and I started listening to what she was having to say. I go, oh, wait a minute. This is really good.
She's actually
And,
pretty
yeah,
smart. Yeah.
very good. And so,
Yeah.
and then the
A little
next
crazy, a little weird, but
right, yeah. So the
yeah.
next person that got up, it seemed a lot more normal and stuff. So I
Yeah.
was sitting way in the back until finally someone turned around and looked up because this is a place that probably holds 300 people, and I'm like way up in the top row in the corner,
Mhm.
super quiet. And someone looks up and everyone turns around and says, "Are you here for the conference?" And I said, "Here we go.
You didn't want to admit
I
it.
can say no. I can say no." And I just looked. I said, "Yeah, I'm here. Well, get down here, young man." And so
Yeah.
I met. Yeah, that's where I met
Well, I
Sean.
remember, David, the first conference I attended was in 2008, and you and I were I was 47, and I guess you're a year older than me, and and we were the youngest there by at least 10 years. so, so that'll just give you an idea of the average age of the
Yeah,
attendees who were
yeah.
at these conferences.
The other,
But I should just a little bit of backstory, if I can, on
sure,
Domina.
sure.
She's 97. She's still alive, and I believe she
Yep.
was teaching past age 90 at the University of
Yes.
Connecticut. She taught there for
Vegetarian. Vegetarian.
yeah, and a couple of people in the NPA had her as a teacher way back
Yep.
in like the 40s, or the 50s. So and she was married to Perry Moon, and Perry Moon was 20 years her senior, so he was born around 1900-ish, and he lived to a ripe old age himself. But anyway, the two of them together, Moon and Spencer, wrote several books, and their books today are I think text, just used in conventional science for as textbooks on electromagnetism. They came up with some real interesting use of coordinates and things like that, and but they also performed some experiments back in the 50s and 60s, challenging the conventional ideas of Einstein, which is one of the points I want to make that people should know, is that dissidents or people challenging conventional science have been around for a long, long time. It's not like
Yeah.
it's something new. There were probably less of them, interestingly enough, maybe in the 50s and 60s than there were later on. Now, in the past 20 or 30 years, I think it's grown. But there were nonetheless, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was a Frederick Soddy, who was Nobel Prize laureate. He put on a conference in somewhere around 1956, challenging the accepted ideas of Einstein. It's like, wow, so it's some, and today, Brian Josephson is another Nobel laureate in physics. He challenges conventional ideas in physics. I've exchanged emails with him a few times, so that's.
Yeah. And
What that
Delmira Spencer was, my goodness, she got her PhD in the 40s, I think during World War II, and she was a
right?
woman. She got a
Yeah,
PhD in mathematics from
not to give them
MIT.
back then. Yeah,
Yeah, and then we have people we have several women in our group that are just astounding. Also, you have Cynthia Whitney, who is our chief officer, and she she told me a story that was really great, and that's in a profile we're putting on our new website, which you'll be able to read about. But she said she got into MIT by not applying to anywhere else. So
well,
she was in I think the Boston area or the Massachusetts area. So
really
she
wanted
would
to.
go there. She got some like exchange classes or high school classes where she could go there, and she really liked it. And so she decided that she had a good chance, and she also decided that her parents didn't want her to go there. So what she did to end around it, as we say in football, she told me she applied to that school and that school alone, was accepted, and by the time it was time to go to college, she went to her parents and said, "Hey, I've been accepted at a college." "Oh, great! What is MIT?" "Well, you're not going to MIT." But I didn't apply anywhere else, and if not, I'm not going to go to school for a whole year. And so they
Wow.
grudgingly let her go, and she got her
Uh-huh.
degree in math and physics. But
Interesting.
but
I don't know if you know this, David, but I was this close to going to MIT myself. I was accepted there. I
wow,
visited the school. I
wow,
also went to Caltech. This is in what, 1979, my high school
sure,
year. I was trying to decide where to go, and I actually got to see Richard Feynman give a lecture. And at the time, I had
wow.
no idea who he was. I thought, oh, this is some cool guy. Everybody was all up in arms about this Richard Feynman, how great he was. So I thought, oh, I'll go see him. And he was. I don't remember what he
Wow.
talked about, to be honest, but I did see him, and I chose to go to neither one of them because I didn't want to be a nerd. I ended up being one anyway, but that's the
Yeah,
truth.
yeah.
I wanted to be more well-rounded, so
You know, it may have that may have jaded you. You would maybe not be
it could be.
sitting there.
Maybe I should have gone to MIT. I don't know, but I
No,
didn't.
if you went to MIT, you wouldn't be sitting here. You'd be
Oh,
laughing
maybe I
at
would have. Yeah,
you'd be
maybe I would
laughing
have
at us.
accepted cold fusion as a hoax.
But
So
anyways,
anyway,
yeah, so John Chappelle started this whole thing. He had a doctoral degree, but there were quirks in these people for sure. And talking to Bruce
few
Nappy,
eccentrics, absolutely.
people at MIT, people at Caltech, people at Stanford, you get nerds and they are quirky. But they're if you what you were saying is very true. You take that person and a person who is a dissident person, and if you don't talk about what exactly subject they're talking about, they're pretty much, they're the same thing. It's just that one seems to be more, how do you say, uh, I think what they
Focused.
are, well, they're critical thinkers for sure, because that's one of the things I'm trying to put into the vocabulary. An intellectual to me is a person who wants to appear smart. They
Hmm.
want to appear smart. I go to MIT. I mimic everything my teacher says. I do it on the test. I write it out. I then go and make a slight modification. So I'll take the same experiment and I'll add
Yeah,
Jello to it. But it
that's
only
not a critical thinker.
yeah, and we're not teaching them, but the people who the nerds that seem to be on the dissident side are those who say, wait a minute, I am giving what I do is I give myself 100% chance to accept and reject anything that comes at me,
Right.
and I think that's an attitude that this entire group has, and what you say is very important. That and in the stories I say, just because this person is a quirky person that I met, and John Chappelle told me about throwing coffee, and then actually that happens at the conference when I'm president. I
Yeah.
have an incident like that, and these people are just passionate about it, and
Yeah.
they're no
Well,
different
I
from
think
any
we
of
can
us.
probably do it without throwing coffee, but yeah, I get it. People get triggered. And I just
Sure.
want to, before you get too far in this, I just want to say that not everybody that's that's a member of the NPA is a nutcase. It's not true.
Oh yeah, no, but it's not, and the whole thing is that, like I said, I think just people who are considered to be intellectuals, the difference between the intellectual side or the nerdy side, it's really
Mhm.
nerdy. I don't care if you're in computer science. I have people in computer science. I had one guy that diddled strings, and you wonder if his emotional state was probably 12 or 13. But then when I go to ask him for code in C++, he gets out a book of code, computer code that's like not English, and types out 2 pages with one syntax error in about 27 seconds. So
Wow.
you have very brilliant people, but this is the case with all brilliant people across the board, and that's what sort of Einstein sort of did,
Yeah.
the disheveled kind of thing. But
Well, interestingly enough, David, I just want to make this point, and that is that you make it sound like all intelligent people are just kind of out in left field, and they're just really really weird. And that's just absolutely that's
no,
not the case, as you
you're
know.
right.
But
Absolutely.
also, I just want to say that one of the things that I feel passionately about personally, and that is that science not only isn't, but and it shouldn't be something that is not accessible to everyone. I
Yeah.
mean, sure, everybody can have different levels of desire to understand something, but I think if science to be well understood, at least at the most basic level, and just the most basic question should be understandable to anyone that really wants to know. And if it's not, then that's the sign that something's wrong. And getting back to Domina, that was one of the things that inspired her. She was told when she was, getting of college age, so late 30s, early 40s or whatever, that only a handful of people, like 4 people in the world, understood Einstein's theory, and she was
Right.
determined to be one of them. that's
Yep.
why
Yep.
that's why she studied it so much, and it wasn't after a decade of doing that, that's when she started to become critical of it. And
Yeah.
that story's happened many times.
Yeah. We have that in the film, actually. She says that in the film, the
Hmm.
Einstein wrong film. But I think the most important thing is that you had people like one of the things that gives me inspiration is looking back on all these other people,
Yeah.
and there's some of us, that are critical thinkers. I'm not such a detailed person. I like new things. I'm in research. I'm in supercomputers and human language. But there are some of us that can communicate, and I think that's just as important. And today and age, especially, it's not easy. When I ask all of our people to write an article for the layman, oh my goodness, you don't always get that.
Sometimes
And,
they
yeah, and
have a
it's
tough
not.
time.
It's so we do need to get this out. We need to have this, and we're just born at the right time where we can put stuff out there. We can
Yep.
make our Wikipedia, and we can have a James Maxwell write the best expansion tectonics encyclopedic entry. And we should have entries for all those kinds of things. We have these things sitting there. And so one of the things I'm hoping the YouTube, and I'm starting to see that, is we're going to get people who are not going to necessarily say, hey, I'm not a person that's going to come up with a new theory, but I love science and I love
Mhm.
this critical thinking area and all these people. And hopefully these kinds of things like these YouTube things and talking about these scientists and getting people interested are going to help us now build around these great minds, because unfortunately, they're older. They're not going to spend the time. They're going to say, look, I don't care about it getting out. I'm not going to spend time to make a YouTube channel. I have work to do before I die. I mean, that's
Mhm.
pretty much what they're doing. So one of the things I think you and I have been involved in, why we do this and why you collect stuff, is to go a little bit above that and say, wait a minute, there is a meta problem of how do we get this information out there. You have
Right.
tons of stuff that hopefully, if we can grow this organization to be thousands of people, that then we can put this stuff available and make our wiki really big, so that even if you don't believe you go this direction in the universe and come back where you started, you at least know what the logic of those people and what they are saying are doing, even though you're completely wrong, Greg. No,
Hmm.
I'm kidding. I'm giving you a hard time, but I'm saying that I think it's really, really important that we also, per people like ourselves, try to get the word out, and
Yeah.
that's not
Well, and,
easy.
and part of that is, like you say, just finding ways to simplify the message that we already have, and yeah, it's an enormous message, and I imagine you've mentioned the World Science Database a few times
Yep.
on your site. This a tremendous resource that, as you know, you and I invested years in developing just a database of a lot of these papers and books and materials, and it's it can always be expanded upon, and we haven't done as much in the last few years, and I'm sure there's a number of things that should be included in there, but there's thousands of books and I don't know, several thousands of papers, um, maybe tens of thousands. I'm not. That's not
Yeah,
quite that.
we have 6,000 papers. But one of the things I do want to reiterate, or touch upon, that you said, I already did a video on, and that is, you're saying that we have to make this more accessible. That's what Margaret
Yep.
Wortham said. But Margaret, the truth of it is, if you unravel this whole thing, and I did a little video on this, and I think it's very true, is that one of the problems isn't that we have to make it more accessible. The problem is mainstream on purpose with esoteric, made up, invented mumbo jumbo, that
Mm.
with logic that if you try to even wrap your head around it, it's an impossibility. It's really that they are not. It's not that we can't understand their very complex things.
It's that it's not understandable.
It's unintelligible. It's illogical. And what I found when I talked to the layman about all of this stuff that we all talk about in the CMPS, they are very satisfied because we're actually talking about real things. We have real answers. They ask a question, you ask a question to a physicist in the mainstream, you get this blah, blah, blah that you don't understand, and then you're told the only way you can understand is come and get a degree in my school, listen to what I say, and I'm telling you the truth, and you better believe it. So I think that's also something to touch upon. But
That
we
kind
could
of
go.
leads to just one of the ideas. There was one of those, one of the people who was instrumental in founding the NPA was Neil Munch, who's also
Yes.
passed away.
Yes.
And he was kind of famous in the group for always challenging assumptions and saying,
Yep.
you got to tell us what your assumptions are.
Yep.
And that's a big thing. The problem, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this very thing, is what are my assumptions, but also what are everybody else's assumptions, so we can find out where they're coming from. And the problem is, there are so many that are not only not stated, but not even recognized. And of course, the most guilty party on this is mainstream science. Mainstream science makes all kinds of assumptions that they don't even realize that they're assumptions, and I'll give you one
simple. I always tell my audience, I said, particle accelerator. Oh, you have to build bigger ones to smash it, and the smaller pieces come all apart in real neat, like onion order. It's like who said that? No one tells you. You don't go to a party that says, okay, the reason we're building this bigger one, because the only way they call energy levels, which doesn't mean much. But the truth is they just want to get closer to the speed of light. And you're going to assume that as I do that, I'm going to break through the next level. But then, think about it. If you're shooting a cannonball at a car and the only thing you can see are the trails, you can't even see what it is. How do you know that what you're trying to find is what you're doing, and that matter even blows apart in that way? You could hit something in a way that you could go 6 levels down in particles, and you'd be seeing that one. But it's some reason, if you get to this is an assumption that no one talks about.
In reality, when we're dealing with particles and their things, what we really have are something called a cloud chamber, where we can see how whatever this object is seems to behave in a certain environment. So if it's in an electric field, it might circulate one way, or if it's in a gravitational field, it might do some other kind of thing. And they say, aha, that's this particle. Well, gee, there's a lot of assumptions there. All we really know is that we're seeing something that's in this cloud chamber that seems to be behaving this way under these circumstances. Whatever that thing is, we'll give it a name. So basically that thing may or may not be, in fact, a thing. It may be a collection of things that are producing these characteristics. So all we really have are a set of characteristics, and anything beyond that is an assumption. So
well, let's go on. We're already 30 minutes into this, and I'm sure we can even go further. But last time I told you, one of the things is because Greg has one of if maybe the largest dissident collection of physics and cosmology, people who work outside those areas, the mainstream. One of the things I've been encouraging him to do, and I think he is willing and wanting to do this, is to become the dissident guru, because you know more about dissonance than anybody on the planet, my opinion. And I thought I'd like to give people a taste of it, so that all I'm going to hear in my comments is, when's Greg going to start? Because I'm going to start doing it. I have 27 books, which is nothing compared to you. But I'm going to start doing it. But I would like you have some books. Why don't you just what I'd like you to do is not to necessarily go real deep, but sort of pick each one up. And I want you to I want us to keep this attitude, and this is something I'm trying to impose upon you, but the attitude of how it's wonderful to pick up this book, no matter how wild or different it may seem, and give us some examples. You pick some out and say.
I did pick some out. Yeah, I picked these out a week ago.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead. Well, this is the first one here. It's Einstein in English, and it's a 3-volume set of the papers originally written by Albert Einstein. And this is volume 3, 1924 to 1954. Sorry if it's backwards. No. It's showing that way on my screen. Anyway, but what might be a huge surprise to people is the person who made this, who did the translation on all of Einstein's paper, was none other than L. Kracklauer, who is a member of the NPA. And as far as I know, this hasn't been done before. where somebody just went and translated all of his papers. And I have read most of them. I can't say that I've read all of them, but enough of them to become pretty well versed in his ideas and his thoughts. And I've said this before, and you've said it too. Einstein himself was, of course, most well known really for his quotes. He was an incredibly quotable person. He wrote some, which had nothing to do with physics, but he was revered, and he was just said a lot of things like, if you keep repeating the same thing over and over again, that's the definition of insanity. That's one of his.
Right. I think the other
which
thing
is absolutely true.
I'd like to mention too in this is that another person in our group, which is Dr. Edward Dowdy, he is super fluent in German. And one of the things I think that would be interesting if people want to get a book like this is that he constantly says to me, and he says in his talks, that he reads German fluently as if it's his language, and he speaks very fluently. For those who don't know, Dr. Dowdy is the one who was at NASA, and he says that when you look at stars outside the corona of the sun, that doesn't bend. So that means general relativity isn't happening. It's really basically mass, and mass bends light, because just like when water bends light. But so that's him. He's in my
no, as I understand, let me just clarify. I think what he's saying, and I'm not sure if this is what you said, is that when the light does get bent when it's within a collection of matter, as we're going to see, obviously closely outside the sun, there's a certain amount of matter, yet we can still see through it. Right. When light is passing through that, then it does get bent. Yes, but when it moves out beyond that, we don't see it bend, because it's not just mass; it's actually the matter that's composing. Is that what you said?
Exactly the same thing. And what happens is that when you see a star outside the corona, corona means there's mass there's stuff in space around that.
Right, there's stuff.
When you're outside that, you're supposed to still see some bending, because general relativity.
If it were due to mass, we would see it. You don't.
Exactly, you don't. Exactly. But that's him. But one of the things he said that I think is very important, and he emphasizes this all the time. He says, when I read the original German of the translations that I read, or the interpretations that I read in English books about relativity, Einstein's statements are not as strong as what you see in English. People will take this and they'll make it into a law. And Einstein
absolutely
talks
true.
about
Einstein
it
himself
in a much
was far
more
less
cynical about his own work.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've said this before, David. If Einstein were alive today, I believe he'd be a member of the NPA. He'd be a critical thinker, without doubt. He'd be, and he was, even to the end of his life. One of the stories that I think the average person doesn't know but should know is that Einstein was. There was kind of a fight in the late 1920s, early 1930s on the direction of quantum mechanics. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but there were basically two interpretations. And by the way, today there are far more than just two. But at that time, there were basically two interpretations. Niels Bohr with Werner Heisenberg took one side, and Einstein and Schrödinger took the other side. And in the end, Einstein lost, and Heisenberg won. And the truth is, the debate should have gone on, because I believe neither side was 100% right.
Sure.
And but the debate was somehow closed, and science was considered to be settled, and it should have just gone on. And that's a very sad but true statement about the nature of our physics today.
Okay, can just a question on that book? We'll go to the next one.
Okay.
Can somebody get that book?
Oh, sure. Yeah. You just the name is Al Kracklauer. I suppose you can get it on Amazon. I don't honestly remember how I got it. I may have gotten it straight from Al. I don't know.
Is he still alive?
Oh, sure. He's not that old. He's must be what? Is he 70? In his 70s, I'm going to guess.
Look at us talking about, he's not old, he's 70.
That's not old by NPA standards. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But anyway, here's one that I like. A guy named Cullwick. What's his first name? Geoffrey Cullwick. This was written in 1939. Books written in 1939 tend to be a lot less exciting than the books today. They have covers like this. That's just the way I have a lot of books from the 20s and 30s and 40s, because I happen to think they're interesting. But this is the one. It's called The Fundamentals of Electromagnetism, and that's probably as exciting for some people as reading Maxwell's treatises, which are also really tedious. But what's interesting about it is back in 1939, here was a man who was understanding electrodynamics from from a non-relativistic point of view. He was critical of Einstein then. He mentioned some things, and I won't go into the specifics about it, but you can find a lot of books from this era which kind of take how should I say, a more realistic approach to electrodynamics. And they're able to reproduce some of the results that we see in special relativity, but they're able to do it in completely different ways than that we're typically taught in conventional Einsteinian physics. So again, it's not to deny the results that we're seeing. It's to find different ways of understanding those results. Those were being done in the 20s and 30s. Lots of people doing some really interesting work on quantum mechanics, and like I said, in the 20s and 30s when it was being formed. It's surprising to go back and study some of this stuff. And you'll see the Moon and Spencer books. They're going to look like this too. They're not all that flashy.
They didn't have marketing then, huh?
Yeah, they didn't have marketing back then. But here's one I think from. I'll go on and what is this from? I'll get the date. This is Herbert Dingle, who wrote this book. Was written in 1961, and this is what you might call an exciting cover.
Wow, that gets my attention just because.
Okay, well, so Herbert Dingle was one of the. Now his story I think is pretty interesting. Herbert Dingle was like Dominus Spencer in that he was a professor of physics for decades, and he wrote some of the textbooks that were kind of the textbooks on understanding relativity and understanding conventional view at that time of Einsteinian physics, which would be the 40s, that kind of period. And he himself had a change of heart, and he actually countered his own works and became one of the greatest critics of Einsteinian theory. And this is not a book on mathematics, but as you can see from the cover, this is a book on philosophy. So this could be read by anyone. Right. This could be read by anyone who just wants to understand what are some of the problems related to this understanding of the world. And why did Herbert Dingle have this change of pace? This is not a man who should be taken lightly. This is a man who was considered an authority on Einsteinian physics worldwide for well over a decade, and had a change of view. He wrote a book in 1972, which I think is one of the most significant books in the history that we're talking about. Was called The Science at the Crossroads. And I don't have that one right here, but where he kind of presents his views and discusses the whole issue. So I think that's a kind of a backstory. Again, a book like this is not one that you're going to see a whole lot of people taking much interest in, but that's the kind of stuff I get a kick out of. So
no, this is kind of my goodness. Like I said, I think you have like years of videos. I mean, I think you should just take a book one at a time and come up or work and talk about it. I mean, it's just fascinating. I have some myself. In fact, I got a Dingle book. I don't remember which one.
Probably Science at the Crossroads. That's his most well-known book.
Yeah, I think so.
But it's interesting to go back and read some of the ones from before his awakening, as it were. And you can see he's teaching just regular conventional Einsteinian physics. Yeah. So anyway. Yeah. I'll give you one more because
Oh, good. All right. Hey, this is great.
This one's kind of interesting. It's called Back to Newton, George de Bothezat. This was written in the 30s, and again, not a very flashy cover. But what's interesting about this is you'd be surprised. This book actually spends a fair amount of time talking about the nature of number. So the chapters are the true meaning of number, rigorous definition of infinity, rigorous conception of continuity. Now you might think, what is continuity? It means, is the universe ultimately quantum, or is it ultimately, continuous? Well, that's, right. To some people may not seem like a big deal, but when you're talking about an understanding of quantum physics, is that to say that, yeah, atoms exist, but do they have structure? Is there some point beneath which there is no structure and yet there's still properties, or is there structure all the way down? This becomes an important question if you want to understand the nature of these kinds of particles.
Right.
So I gave this book to Peter Erickson, who is
Oh
you
my
know, one
goodness,
of the
oh my goodness. I was going to mention
I
his name
suggested
because when
that
you
he read
said
this
numbers,
book.
holy
Yes,
moly.
well, he got so excited about this. In fact, he ended up writing another book just based on what he'd read out of this one from my suggestion. So, um,
I love Peter Erickson. He is
yeah, he has some interesting ideas, and he just focuses on the nature of numbers. That's kind of his thing, which you might think, well, what's that got to do with physics? Well, it has a
oh,
lot to do with
a
physics because
lot. I'll give an example of it. My father, in his calculations with the particle model, there are times we shift everything over on a coordinate system so that it's all positive. Because if you make it negative, you're just introducing a mathematical quirk that you happen to pick it here because you want the sine wave to go through the middle line through the sine wave. You don't have to do it that way. And if you're in the physical world, sometimes those negative numbers don't get you mixed up because you want to have a better relationship between math and the physical world. I mean,
absolutely.
I always wondered when I first saw Peter Erickson's talk, he's not going to win awards as a speaker. he didn't go to the Rotary clubs, he didn't go
Yeah, I
to
get it.
Toastmasters, but
But
he
his
blew
books
my
are awesome.
he talked at a conference. He wrote down one of the I'm going to have to get that. He wrote down the square root of I is equal to I times. He wrote this equation. I said, we need to make a T-shirt out of it. Of course, I'm a mathematician, and everybody
Yeah.
looks at me like I'm nuts. But these are the kinds of things. I think a couple of things. The math system we use is an imperfect system.
Uh-huh.
People think it is a perfect system. It isn't. It's a decimal system, and it's got its flaws, like the square root of -1. The other
Hmm.
thing is he also, the other thing that you were talking about is you held up books that were philosophy. One of the some of my
Yeah.
subscribers, they're saying, well, who cares about philosophy? Philosophy, when you start to become a critical thinker, you
Oh,
start to realize
absolutely.
philosophy is impossible to get rid of, and that's
Then
what I.
you have to ask questions like why? Why are things the way they are? Oh, absolutely. You can't get away from that. In fact, we were called the Natural Philosophy Alliance for a reason because science, back if you go before 1900, it was still called natural
Yeah.
philosophy. It just meant the philosophy of nature, and I
Yes.
really think we should return to that
Yes.
whole idea of looking at things. But ultimately, even math is just an expression of philosophy and logic.
Yeah.
uh, that's all it is, and understanding that. And in fact, I'll just a quick story. I'm drawing a blank on this man's name. uh, Robert Carroll wrote some just brilliant little essays solving some really complicated problems. Like he solved the four color problem, which anybody who's studied mathematics knows that one's been a really
Right.
challenging one for decades. He solved Fermat's last theorem, and I read the paper,
Wow.
and well, but here's the point. Now, I'm not a rigorous mathematician. I love math, and I definitely play with it. I don't know if it satisfied all the rigors, but the problems that I've found with this kind of stuff is that it's hard to get anybody to look at stuff to be able to tell you if it's say this one passes muster, this one doesn't. It's like it's not so easy. My point is that Robert Carroll was writing these papers, and he died before I even came about. I could get his books too, but he was a professor at University of West Virginia. Um, anyway, my point is I learned from reading his papers that even in mathematics, which you would think mathematics, well, there's black and white, right? Now there's gray in mathematics too. There's assumptions being made there too. So it's not clear what constitutes a real proof and what does not. And that was my point, is that as far as I was concerned, the stuff that he wrote convinced me, but I don't know if it was a rigorous proof. I have yet to find somebody to say, well, it wasn't a rigorous proof because because it didn't do this. So I don't know. He thought
Yeah.
they were rigorous enough, and they were very logical and common sense things, solutions to these problems. So they worked for me. But what do I know?
Yeah. Well, to wrap it up here, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, I have some answer too, but I'd like to ask you first. You're hopefully you'll be starting a YouTube channel sometime in the near future, and really
Keep pushing
recording
me.
this. Yeah, but to record, even just recording, talking about these books and getting people interested in. And let's say the books that you have, I'm going to get a list. You're going to immediately email the list of those books to me, and I
Hmm.
will put that in the description of the
Sure.
YouTube here. And okay, you got these books, but where can I get them? I know where are
They're all
some of,
available at Amazon, all of them.
but
You have to.
there's also, I know that's one place, but I also have found that you can find them in other places as well. One of
Sure.
the things is there are used books often.
Yeah.
And I think even Amazon have that. I bought a lot of my books that ended up being libraries that were going out of business because
There you go.
I would get a book from, I would buy on Amazon used books. Used books on Amazon is a lot of times where you can find these. I
Hmm.
think there's other places as well, but you can sometimes pick up these books for dollars, right?
Nothing. Yeah, they're cheap a lot of times. What's interesting I found with these kind of not rare but just hard to find books is that sometimes they'll be just a ridiculous price, like
Oh yeah,
$150,
yeah,
and then you find the same book for $3. It's
yeah.
like
Well, know what normally it is. It's signed by that person. That's why.
I no, I think just they're trying to make a lot of money on it because it's so rare. So you have to be a little bit careful.
Right, of
But
course.
it's, as far as finding stuff that came from libraries, it makes sense because a library, like our library here in town's got only so much room, and they're constantly getting rid of the old books.
Yeah,
If it's before 2000, then that's ancient. So they're
yeah.
getting rid of that stuff, and where are they going to put it? Well, I end up buying it.
They
So
have, yeah, they have I know it here in Boca. They have a beautiful new library, but in that library they have a store, and
yeah.
they'll send people who even have books. So they said, I don't want to throw these away, or people who
Mhm.
pass on, they'll give them to the store. And I went and bought all these books that I knew my dad would stimulate him for the particle model, and it was
Yeah.
like, these books would have cost me $100 and some for, I get them for like, I literally went up to this, okay, I was expecting that it's going to cost, because it's for my dad's birthday, right? He's 80 years old. I said, we're going to buy him some books. My daughter and
Uh-huh.
I are there, and we get up there, and I go, okay, it's going to probably about $60, $70. Okay, it's my dad 80th birthday. And she goes, $14, please.
For
I go,
for what? How
four.
many books?
I had four books that I
Oh
looked at the
wow,
prices that if you bought
that's
them at the
cheaper than
time.
Amazon.
Well,
You
these
didn't
are
have to
like
pay
those
shipping.
are like these physics books, illustrated big physics books of
Mm,
encyclopedic knowledge about almost everything that you
mm,
would probably pay, $49 per book on. And
yeah.
I almost, I turned to
Well,
Luanda and I said, we got to buy something else, Dad. I feel cheap. This is
it,
like,
well, in general, I would say this, and that is that we live in an age, of course, that's an electronic age, and my son, he doesn't want to own any books. He
yeah,
just wants to
yeah.
do everything electronically, and if it doesn't exist electronically, then I guess it doesn't exist. Well, most of these books, don't exist electronically, so the only way to get them is to actually get the physical book. And that's why I like the old ones, because
Yeah.
the newer ones, you don't need to do that. You can get a lot of stuff online today. And so the good news is that they're really available because people don't throw them out, and yet they're trying to get rid of them at these
Oh,
libraries.
they
So
sell them. They sell them, because if people like books, it's their hobby. They'll buy different
yeah.
kinds of books, and you'll get them from all over the place. I've bought books. I remember in the beginning when I was really buying a lot, when we were doing our database. I remember people literally sending me an email. I kept this book. It's sort of weird, but I thought somebody would like it, and it turns out that I got like Samuel Warren Carey's book. That again, like you said, you can find those things if they're in good condition for $250. I got it for like, yeah, it was like $50, but they're a rare edition of this book in the future when expansion tectonics
Right.
probably becomes
Well,
more
I don't
mainstream.
collect books for getting a rare edition. That's just
Oh, I
I
know.
just want the information in them.
I mean, but
That's
they will be eventually. I mean, they
could
will
be. I
be.
don't know. That's not why I collect them. I
Well,
just
I don't collect them like that either, but I'm saying that some of these books are hard to get because, like a Warren Carey is actually read in mainstreams. So
right.
for them, it is sort of rare. So still get these books that are pretty, that's a good example of a book that
Right.
today I noticed. I bought that 10 years ago. Today it's hard to get and it's expensive. So,
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe some of the books I have nobody else can get. I don't know.
that's right.
Like I said, the really super rare ones are the stuff that like stuff from John Chappelle's. Nobody's going to have that. So
Yeah.
those are the most valuable, I guess, in a way, of the things I have. And
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that I have, I've not all of it, but a good chunk of it is in the World Science Database. I mean, that was really kind of what it was. It's sort of my list of what I have.
Yeah,
So
we've got lots and lots of
there's a
abstracts
lot.
without the papers themselves. We would
Yeah,
type in the
I
abstract.
have a lot of those papers that just need to. I go through these boxes, and who's got time to do it? I
Right.
want to do
Well,
it.
I
I've
mean, that's
done
one of the
some of it,
things in
but
the
and
future.
scan them.
Yeah, in the
It's
future we would have a department
I'm
and
hoping.
people and money to do that.
Yeah, I'm hoping
Yeah,
that we'll.
maybe a rich person will
That's
come
their
along.
passion, is to want to do that. I've had a few people say, "Yeah, I really want to do it," and then they didn't. So
Yeah. What you
be nice
really
to
need
find
is a
some people that
person.
actually will follow
Yeah.
through and make it a valuable thing for them.
Well, listen, we can always go on, but I really appreciate it. This is great, and we'll just keep doing it until you do your own channel or something.
Okay. Well,
But
I'm happy
we have.
to get to shout out to all the people that are on your channel.
Yep,
And,
yep,
I
absolutely.
hope this is valuable. If there's anything I can do
Absolutely, I know it
to
is. They'll
help
probably
out,
start watching you, and you'll pass my viewers. And this is all, this is all an ego game.
well,
No,
I
it's
get to
not.
talk about some of my own ideas, and then
Yeah,
really.
there you go. You can bore the heck. What you'll find though is a good thing is YouTube will list your videos, and the ones
Yeah,
that you talk about your stuff. If people, you'll see how many people view that. You know what
yeah.
my
Well,
highest viewed one is the flaws in special relativity. I've got over 1,000 views on that one in a short amount of time. You never
yeah.
know what's gonna hit, but you certainly have. I will be your first subscriber, and I'll watch every one of yours, probably over a couple times. So, we'll work on that. I'll work on it, people. I promise. I'm trying to get these guys out there. But anyways, thank you so much again, Greg, and we'll
All
talk to
right.
you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, David.
Okay?
Bye.
And remember what I always say, don't take his word or mine. Read a book. Read these books. Stay critical, stay thinking. I'm David Hilster, and I'm your science therapist, and I got another one right over here if I can point up this way. There you go. He's a science therapist. Oh, we have two screens. I see him. He doesn't. So thank you so much. Ciao for now.